The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is The Vulnerable Pastor.
Hello, everyone. It's Wade Franson here, and I'm back with another exciting episode of Created in the Image of God. Exciting because I have a guest here who I'm really looking forward to interviewing and sharing with you. This is partly due to some things I'm going through on a personal level. I don't know how much I've shared here, but we've had a number of deaths in my immediate family over the last couple of years. And I'm just back from a trip where there's a court case brewing about the accident which took my younger sister away from me suddenly, unexpectedly. I can't speak to any of the details. As I mentioned, there's a court case, but I'm going through a lot personally, and I'm really appreciating the opportunity to interview this particular guest. Her name is Mandy Smith. She is a pastor, author, and thoughtful voice on sustainable human-scaled ministry. She's best known for her book, The Vulnerable Pastor: How Human Limitations Empower Our Ministry. She writes with honesty, theological depth, and lived pastoral experience. I could say more about her, but let's just welcome her into the studio. Welcome to the studio, Mandy.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you, Wade.
And as people can tell immediately from your accent, you're dialing in from a different time zone and location. Where exactly is that?
Yeah, I'm in Brisbane, Australia. So it is Tuesday morning for me. I guess it's still Monday for you. So the future looks fine.
That's good to know. The future looks fine. I'm taking that to the bank right now. As we always do on the show, we first go to look at the past, right? So tell us a little bit about your very early years, your parents, the circumstances which molded and shaped you as you were gaining experience as a little girl, I assume down under.
Yep. Grew up in Australia. I have lived in the US and UK for 25 years, but my childhood was all in Australia. And I'm so grateful to be able to say that my family just lived for me what it looked like to trust God. That was just a part of it felt like that was just infused in everything that we did, not in a holier than thou kind of separate from the world way, but in a way that the world felt infused with God. And just going on a walk or going on vacation and looking at the ocean or looking at birds or enjoying whatever life was, there was often a reference to, isn't it amazing that God made things that way? And so I'm really grateful that it's not hard for me to imagine that God is good, because I've had that lived experience. Of course, not a perfect family, but a family that did live out that faith and pray together and all that kind of thing. So I'm so grateful for that. I think what I didn't always feel confident in was my own self. And as an artist and an introvert, it's easy for me to get overwhelmed and to interpret that as incompetence. And it's only as an adult that I've come to see that often is because I'm taking in a lot of information from the world, and that can be a gift. It's just difficult to know what to do with all that information, emotional and social and spiritual things, as well as, data. So I think as a child, I probably wasn't very conscious that I might have some agency and some power and some things to share with the world. And so it's taken me a long time to figure some of that out. Although I do think that, one of my books is about childlikeness, because Jesus says, unless you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And I've never heard a sermon on that, or, it's a throwaway comment, I think, for many of us. And we often, we think, well, it's nice to be winsome, it's nice to wonder, but nobody can live like that all the time as an adult. So it's lovely to do that on vacation, thanks Jesus, but adults can't live like children. And so I have taken some serious time as an adult to explore, what on earth was Jesus talking about? That this is so much more than just being, wondering at the world and being whimsical. There's an attentiveness that children have. There's an honesty and a courage that children have. There's just an openness and availability that children have. And so I was encouraged as an adult as I started exploring these things. And Thomas Merton was a great help to me in this, because I think he was one of the adults I've come across who had figured some of this out. It helped me appreciate how, look back on my childhood in a way that realized I wasn't cute. Children aren't actually, their feelings are just as powerful as adult feelings. Their ideas may not be as wise as adult ideas, but in some ways they're more wise in a different way. And so even now, as I'm thinking back to myself as a child, I have a kind of respect for her, that she knew how to walk on a beach and just be available and just explore and just discover things and not have an agenda, just be open to whatever God provided and marvel at that without having expectations of something else she needed. And there was an honesty there, and there was an open-heartedness, a willingness to let yourself feel and let yourself long. And I'm learning from her still, and it's encouraging to me to remember that whatever it is that Jesus meant about needing to be like a child is something we've already all done. We did this as kids, and it's just something to remember. It's not something that we have to entirely reinvent.
Well, at risk of destroying the normal flow of the show, I want to dig into that a little bit. On this trip that I just took, I was actually noticing some of the little children, for whatever reason, around me. And I was thinking about exactly that. I was just thinking about the purity and the innocence and the joy that they expressed, and that I felt at hearing them, make their statements and their observations about what was going on as they were experiencing this very unusual thing for them, which is travel, international travel to Canada. We were up in Canada a couple of weeks ago for this memorial. And then, so yeah, I think there's definitely a power there. So what are some of your thoughts on what Jesus was getting at with that statement?
I think fundamentally it was about being unafraid of our powerlessness and being unsurprised when we can't run the universe. As adults, I think we spend so much time being ashamed of that and being surprised by that. And I think I've just come to a place where there's such a freedom on the other side of that. There's the reality of all the things we can't control and fix and understand. And then we can make it even harder for ourselves if we add this should to that. Like, I should be able to fix and control and understand. And the shame of that, of like, something's wrong with me because everybody else seems to be able to fix and control and understand. And I think one of the big shifts in my adult life has been realizing God never asked me to fix and control and understand the universe. And the should that I put on myself and the shame that I put on myself is not from him. And I'd rather put my attention and energy into navigating a world I can't fix and control and understand than the infuriating effort to fix and control and understand, and the weight of feeling something's wrong with me, that I can't be God, basically, And I think this is what Jesus is wrestling with in his temptations in the wilderness, that I think that the enemy is fundamentally coming after him as a human being and showing him this huge mission that he has and saying, You can't control the outcomes of this mission. You can't force people to love you and follow you. And you've just got 2 small feet and 1 small voice. And how are you going to accomplish this mission of changing the world? You could just go back to being God. Just go back to God, being able to control more. And Jesus dogmatically refuses every time to be ashamed of his human limitations. And thank God that he did. And I think that's a freedom he's inviting us into. And that a modeling that he was more willing to be human than we usually are, I think. And there's something really childlike about that in trusting in the Father's guidance, the Father's provision. And so just losing that surprise, I think, is something that I'm trying to remember from my childhood, that I'm not able to control the whole world and that I'm not called to.
Well, and as you talk about that, I'm thinking about this from multiple angles here. On the one hand, the show's called Creating the Image of God that we're on, and I'm constantly reflecting on the fact that we were given complete freedom in the Garden of Eden, right? Freedom to do whatever. We were given guidance of what would be helpful and less helpful. But we were allowed to do what we wanted to do. And that is the nature of the universe that we sometimes want to control. But it was structured in such a way that God himself is not even controlling it in that sense. So why are we trying to assert control? And you mentioned become like God. Yeah, but become even more like God, like our idea of God, which would be very controlling, which God is not. Right? And then the other thing I was thinking about is how all the problems that we experience in society, they're not coming from what we were like as children. I mean, in a sense, maybe they are coming from foolishness and a lack of wisdom and carelessness and heedlessness, some of these things that children would have, naivety. But this become like a little child is, in order to fix the things that are wrong, we would have to let go and go back to becoming like little children and become more observant and learn what it was we did wrong in the first place, because all these impositions are coming at us from society that are taking that childlikeness out of us. And maybe it's a kind of a 2-step forward, 1 step back kind of thing, because we have to grow, we have to mature. Paul said, strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. So from that childlike state in the Garden of Eden of absolute freedom and do whatever you want, comes that maturity and saying, well, now that I've experienced some of these things, there are some things I wouldn't do again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in scripture, there is a distinction between childishness and childlikeness. Paul says, when I became a man, I put away childish things. And what I know, and this is from my book, Unfettered, we don't usually have a hesitation about adultishness. Anytime that I said, oh, I'm writing and thinking about childlikeness, people would say, have this hesitation, but don't be childish, And I've never in my whole life heard somebody say, don't be too adultish. Like we see this in politicians and leaders all the time at the moment. I think of like this adultishness, in my definition, is assuming that you are in control of everything and that it's your job to be in control of everything, and this abuse of power and this overuse of our agency. And so I think for me, childishness is being afraid of our powerlessness and being afraid of our powerfulness. Adultishness is being afraid of our powerlessness. So there's when it comes to, God has given us agency. God has invited us to be like him, but be like him in the right ways. And when we begin with that childlikeness of being open to him and being available and being teachable, something happens when we connect with God in that place that gives us a power and gives us a mission and gives us insight, that then we're going to need to bring all of our agency, all of the adult likeness that's going to allow us to bring that into the world, embracing what what power God has given us, but not with an abusive, I've got to fix the world kind of thing. And that's been tricky for me to figure out, because I think we are called to be comfortable with powerlessness, but also comfortable with ways that we are powerful and that we do have agency and that we're given a voice to speak. And something happens when we begin with the childlikeness that allows us then to take back whatever agency we do have in a way that isn't trying to be God, but is trying to, become God in the way that he intended us to become like him, and not in a way that's trying to usurp him and become God instead of him. To partner with him is, I think most of my life has been trying to figure out how to partner with God in a way that's not just me going off on my own or me assuming I'm doing God's work for him, but somehow releasing enough control that I'm listening to him all the time, but always in a way that's aware that he's ultimately the one who began this and is asking me to join him in it. And I think that's worship. That's heaven. That's where we're supposed to be,
So let's wrap up this first segment by going back to sort of the general format. And I'm going to pick up on what you just said when we come back from the break. But when and how was it that you sort of transitioned from your early years, your developmental years, into an understanding of this is what I want to do with my life, and then got into the pastoring work and later writing books? What was all that like, that sort of maturing moment for you?
Yeah, I kind of had to grow up rather quickly because my boyfriend, when I was 17, decided to move to America and study the Bible. He was 5 years older than me and he was ready to go. And I was like, well, I'm not staying behind. And so right out of high school, we got married and then moved to the US to study together. And I thought I was going just to support him in his studies, and ended up having a chance to do a biblical studies degree as well. And for me, that was I just love scripture. I just want to learn. And it was such an amazing experience to just have that uninterrupted time to just dig in and read and be in a community of other people learning. I definitely had a sense of call to follow God and to do what he was asking me to do. But I was in a context that did not ordain women or encourage women beyond women's ministry and children's ministry, which are wonderful ministries. And so the question of like, okay, well then what am I actually going to do with this degree? What am I going to do with this? I mean, even beyond the degree, this passionate sense of I have to say yes to whatever God asks me to do. It wasn't a job description that he was asking me to do. He was asking me to follow him. And I was just joyful to say yes. But in a context where I was told all the things I couldn't do, it was really quite a painful experience, So there's been a lot of wrestling within my own self and with God, and a lot of healing that's had to come for me to be able to become a pastor as I currently am now. So it's been a bit of a roundabout path, and but I can look back and see that so many of the ways that my faith has been honed has been in those questions where what I'm sensing from God in my own spirit and what people around me are telling me, when those things are in conflict, I have no choice but to go back to the Lord and say, who do you say I am? What are you asking me to do? And although it was incredibly painful to be in those situations, having the opportunity to go back to him over and over again has really honed my faith and my sense of call that I draw upon every day now in my work that I do. So strangely, the thing that seemed to disqualify me or sideline me has been a way that God has prepared me for this work.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to go to a quick commercial break, and it might be a video that's related to this topic. We haven't fully decided which, since we're pre-recording today. But when we come back, I'm going to pick right up where we left off with Mandy Smith. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on creating in the image of God.
Soul Seeds is both a one-day community garden experience and an annual roadmap for integrating and revitalizing local communities. In a single day, Soul Seeds brings youth, families, residents, and volunteers together
to transform underused space into a living garden, planting not just vegetables and flowers, but the seeds of service, self-reliance, and community. But Soul Seeds doesn't end in one day. It becomes an annual plan. Plant together, manage together through shared care, youth leadership, and community connection. And harvest together, food, beauty, trust, and a stronger neighborhood. In honor of Earth Day, Soul Seeds helped restore an overgrown courtyard at a nursing and rehab center. In one day, volunteers cleared the space, transplanted a rose bush, and planted flowers, vegetables, and a tea garden. When we returned the next week, residents were glowing with pride, already caring for the garden as their own. At New Fountains Apartments in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, a youth group called the Justice League asked for help building a raised bed garden. Even in pouring rain, they built the frame, filled it with soil, and planted the garden, showing that community grows strongest when people serve together, rain or shine. Led by the Royal Falcon Foundation, and powered by partners including the Bridge to Kindness, Summit Credit Union, and the Belleville Community Health Improvement Project, Soul Seeds is now being piloted in Wisconsin and Ohio as a model for broader community and credit union engagement. One day can launch it. 1 year can sustain it. One community at a time, Soul Seeds helps neighbors plant, manage, and harvest a better future. Join us and grow with us.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God with Mandy Smith, a pastor from Down Under, who wrote The Vulnerable Pastor, How Human Limitations Empower Our Ministry. I want to get personal on that topic because I personally resigned in 1995 from the full-time ministry. I continued as a lay pastor for a while, but there's an aspect of what I did and why I did when I resigned, which was to separate my faith from my paycheck. But there was another underlying component, and that was the responsibility and the accountability that I felt like I had at that time. And in our denomination, in the particular focus that we had, there was a lot of talk about the ministry doing the work of God. One of the last sermons I gave questioned that and said, why do we stand up here and presume to say we're doing the work of God? What, have we made God unemployed? What's he doing if we're doing his work for him? It was deeper than that. And I didn't make any friends when I, with neither the ministry nor the lay people who wanted a ministry who sort of assumed perhaps more authority than they really had. Which is why I wanted out of it, because I didn't like the members looking to me as I tried to point them to God.
Yeah.
And it was very hard to actually get the point across that, no, I'm not here to answer your questions. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to encourage you to develop your relationship with the Father who can do all of those things for you.
Mm-hmm.
But in our denomination, it wasn't quite so simple. So I wanted to invite you to sort of respond to that in the light of your work and your book and all the things you were saying right before the break.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel it. And I have moments in my ministry where somebody looks at me in such a way that I realize they're mistaking me for God. We all want something right in front of our eyes that we can touch and say, this is my hope. I don't need to look any further. This is where I'm going to find my strength and my encouragement. And ministers can fall into that trap, and it actually feels quite delicious. It's been good for me to name, especially if you're not feeling like you're doing a great job, which is a common feeling in ministry, and someone looks at you like, won't you be my God? It's so easy to fall into that temptation. And it's a strange thing that it's our job to actually teach people even how to see us. And I've had moments like that where I've had to kind of do a little sidestep and say, yeah, let's look for God together. Let's pursue him together. And thankfully, it's this strange kind of way that ministry feels impossible every day, and it can be that in itself is the thing that keeps ministers, or that has the opportunity to be the reason why ministers keep trusting God themselves. The work itself is beyond us. And the sad thing is, when we feel that, it's like I was saying earlier, in the beginning, when I felt how impossible the work of ministry is, I had that, but I should be able to fix and control and understand this. Something must be wrong with me, because I see plenty of ministers out there who seem to be able to do this. Therefore, the impossible nature of this work is a sign that I'm not good enough yet, or that I'm not working hard enough yet, or that I need to buy another book or go to another conference. It's great to work hard. I am not a lazy person. It's great to buy books and go to conferences, but those are not the thing that's going to help me. I work really hard. I try to answer all my emails. I try to lead faithfully. And at the same time, all of the work I do never feels like it's enough. And when you come to the end of yourself like that, what are you going to do? Are you going to, I think this is why so many ministers either make abusive choices or burn out, because they haven't, like, if there's one thing I can say to people, it's like, it's all right for it to feel impossible. And that is the place where we're supposed to say, oh God, I need you. Oh God, like to push back from the desk in the middle of writing the sermon, or to stop in the middle of the meeting where everything just hit the fan, and to just cry out to the Lord and say, this is your church. You were here before me. You will be here after me. Whatever it is you've given me to do is not in your place, but in partnership with you. And that's the only way that I know. I never feel on top of things. Like I often say, I'm not comfortable, but I'm getting used to the discomfort of this feeling like I should be complete and I should have all the answers. But God never asked that of us. Like, that's something we've picked up from the world, that it's our job to be God in that unhealthy way. Scripture says, be God by becoming like me, by following me and paying attention to me and needing me every day. And I can do that. It's not comfortable, but I'm getting used to the discomfort of that.
A quick question on the term ministry versus priest. What's your take on the role of a minister versus the designation of priest?
You mean in the sense of kind of that intercessor person, the priesthood kind of idea, or do you mean?
Well, when I think about this, the one sort of thing I could still hold on to was, I'm here to minister, not to be a priest.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Yes. Oh, goodness. I have a good friend, Dave Hansen, who's written a couple of beautiful books on ministry. And I think it's in the art of pastoring, I think it's called, where he says the pastor is a parable of Jesus. And so I love this thought that we have an opportunity to live in such a way that makes it easier to understand Jesus. And some of the ways that this work feels impossible and overwhelming are actually more invitations for us to know our need for God. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think of that often, that there's a surprising way, even last weekend on Sunday at church, there's a surprising way that it actually ministers to our people for us to reveal our need for Him, for God, and for them. And that seems to be really an uncomfortable possibility. Whenever I speak to ministers, the thought that they are allowed to let their needs be shown is a really scary thing. And I appreciate that there are some ministry contexts that are not ready for that and that are not safe for that. And of course, there are wise ways to do that and unwise ways to do that. I'm not talking about seeing your congregation as your counselor, but just to let them in behind the scenes of how you need God. If it's so beautiful, I was really feeling a bit overwhelmed last week. We've had a few big things happening and changes that I'm having to navigate behind the scenes that not everybody knows about. And without dumping all of that on people, I just shared, like, I really need you to pray with me right now about how to navigate, how the whole congregation can navigate these changes. And I don't know where God's leading us. I do believe God is leading us. And I was so encouraged by how people stepped up and how people felt really empowered by that invitation to walk with God with me. And so one of the craziest ways of how I minister to people is by letting them know God's called them to mission as well, and that I'm not some superhero who has everything figured out, but that, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's what comes to mind when you ask it.
Well, no, and I think that's the distinction that I kind of have in my head between the two roles, right? So no, I think you did certainly answer it for me, and hopefully for those in the audience as well. So
I should also say, can I just add one more thing quickly?
Sure.
There's so much conversation at the moment, at least in my circles. Well, I think it's in beyond my circles, of just what is the role of the minister, because we have seen so much power abuse in ministry, sadly, in recent years. And I think the answer is not to go to the other extreme of saying, well, then we don't need leaders anymore and nobody has any authority anymore, and the minister is entirely useless and does not have a unique role. And I think that's an overcorrection, from the abuse. To do the opposite of an abusive thing is not necessarily a healthy thing. And so what I've really had to do is ask, okay, well then I do have a unique role. What is my role here? And a lot of it has to do with, I have more time available to me to be paying attention here than most people in the congregation have, and to be praying, and I might even just know a lot of things that other people don't know. I'm in lots and lots of conversations that some of them are only in one or two of those conversations. And so there's a way that I have a perspective that is unique in this place, and that can invite unique ways of bringing things together. And I think also that, and this is similar to what I was saying earlier about the childlikeness and adult likeness, we as Christian people have an agency. God has given us gifts and time and capacities and energies and authority, and the question is if we will use our authority out of our anxieties that we're supposed to be able to fix and control and understand everything, or if after the surrender to God, we find something in him that is an authority in his way. Jesus astounded people with his authority, but it came from his surrender to the Father, not from his domineering ways. And so there is a kind of authority that a pastor can have in a healthy way that comes from, I think one of the ways I most kind of started to embrace this was just appreciating the authority that I had in my children's lives for their good, that I've lost sleep for you. I've read books about this. I've had millions of conversations with other parents to try to figure this out. And I have given up my resources, my home, my life for your good. And so I may not be 100% right all of the time, but my goodness, I have a right to speak into your life because I know you better than probably you know yourself, And so because of how much any leader has surrendered, the way they lose sleep over it, the way that they work hard over it, the way that they give up, nobody knows the things that they have to do behind the scenes. Christmas Eve here, I'm the one mopping up the mess when the pipes burst and everyone else is on vacation because I live next door to the church, and my husband heard the thing leaking everywhere on Christmas Eve. Like, there are just so many things that people don't even know, sacrifices that you make behind the scenes and ways that you surrender that don't make you perfect, but give you a unique perspective and a unique kind of authority that it's our calling to bring in the right way.
Well, I'd like to go in a slightly different direction on this topic of authority, because I think it will be interesting. We here in the United States, we are experiencing what I am increasingly calling an ideological civil war, and the fronts of this war are multiple. In an oversimplification and a caricature of it, you could call it progressive and conservative, but it's not that simple. It's multidimensional. But it's become very extreme, and there's just one of the fault lines is that of gender. And I want to talk specifically here about something that was of deep personal impact to me years ago, because I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced, and later I sadly experienced my own divorce after saying I would never get divorced. And this caused a deep reflection on the role of men and women, going back to the book of Genesis, and what some people call the fall, and the curse. I began to write a book that was originally intended to be called The Curse of Eden, in which I get at this question of when God told Eve, your desire will be to your husband and he will rule over you. And so the husband being the head of the wife. And then Paul's comments later, in which he says, yes, the husband is the head of the wife in the same way that Christ is the head of the church, which to me completely flips the script and is essentially saying, well, sure, in our culture, I'll go along with that model, because it's a model that, we've kind of got to conform to in our society. But let me tell you that it's not at all like that, right? Because Jesus sacrificed himself and became the servant of the church, to the point of death. And if you want to be the head of something, you must serve that thing. So, broadly speaking, gender roles are a huge issue along this ideological culture war. And I don't want to get into specifics other than that single quote, the role of men and women in marriage. Because you mentioned authority. What's your view on all that? I'm just curious, because there's a lot of it is huge, and I apologize. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
That's okay. It's an interesting, it's a fascinating conversation, and I often enjoy the conversation. I'm just trying to think what of all the things that you could say. Well, I'm actually just wrapping up a manuscript at the moment called What Women Know About Jesus, and I'm not really at all interested in arguing for women's leadership. I'm exhausted by those arguments because they have built into them particular assumptions about what a leader even is. And I'm more interested in saying, how are women already leading? It may not even be understood as leadership in the world, but maybe the very ways that they lead are radical and challenge what is really important. And maybe the best thing to do is for us to reshape our imaginations around what the kingdom is and what leadership looks like in the kingdom, and how women are already actually doing that, and stop being ashamed of how they might seem small according to the world's perspective. And so somehow that feels connected to what you're asking, that in so many of the conversations about gender, I feel like we're still battling, even in the church, we're still embroiled in the world's battle and the world's definitions and the world's expectations of it's a scarcity kind of approach that says there's not enough to go around, so we got to fight over it. And I just refuse to get drawn into that and have to trust that, yes, and it's important for you to understand this is coming from someone who has been deeply harmed by many of the conversations about gender, and who I've had people blogging about me and people assuming the worst of me and calling me all kinds of gender-oriented names because I would dare to want to lead in some way or speak about the Bible. And so the peace that I feel and the joy that I feel from it has not come from necessarily always having a rosy situation, but I don't know if your leaders want to go here with me, but I had a moment. There was a particular time when I was in a denomination that was very discouraging of women in leadership, and God kept calling me and opening doors for me, and I had to wrestle with what the Bible said about all of that. But I had a moment at a conference where a particular man spoke really unkindly towards me. And I don't mind if people disagree with my interpretation of scripture about what women can do, but do so in a Christ-like way. And it became kind of a common thing to be called nasty names or to get this kind of pushback that didn't feel at all like the way Christians should have disagreements. And this one man interrupted me at a conference and spoke really un-Christ-likely to me. And I just looked him in the face, and I think God just enabled me to step back a little bit. And I just thought, I've never seen this face before, but I know this spirit. And somehow being able to distinguish, I don't know if this particular person was just anxious or what it was. And I don't think he's possessed by the devil, but there is a spirit, there are spiritual forces which want to cause damage to the beautiful harmony God intended between men and women. And I think there's a specific, because there's such beauty in the way that we're supposed to come together to represent, not only in a marriage, but just in our conversation as a man and woman here, like in our partnership, in our co-leadership of the church. There's something about the unity between men and women, the way God intended it, that's supposed to reveal him to the world in its fullness. And so I think that's a real threat to the darkness. And so there's specific forces made to come against that unity. And something changed in me on that moment when I realized I recognize this spirit that I can't force all the men in the world to like me or agree with me or support my leadership or whatever. But I have already been told our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against these principalities and spirits. And also we've been promised that those things have already been overcome by the death and resurrection of Jesus. And something allowed me then to shift out of the victimhood or the frustration or the aggression or the desperate evil kind of struggle of, until all these men in the world appreciate me or welcome me, then I can never do my calling. And that just feels evil to me, that there's this impossibility built into that. And instead to be able to say, my battle is not against flesh and blood. Even if there are men in my life who have mistreated me or misunderstood me, they are still my brothers in Christ, and there is a unity in the spirit that we may not experience fully, but we don't have to fight we have to fight to represent the unity God has already given us. God doesn't say fight to have unity. God says work to reveal the unity that you already have been given in this united spirit. And so that's a long story, but it felt like something shifted on that day, that I remembered that the enemy was not my brothers, but that the enemy has already been overcome, and to walk with peace in the things God asks me to do, and hope for unity, and also appreciate that I don't have to get drawn into the world's scarcity and the world's anxiety and the world's us versus them and all of that in order to, I think we're supposed to live according to a better kingdom where there is room for everyone. And there's real healing when we do that, even though we don't see it yet.
Wow, thank you so much for the way you unpack that. And what really comes to the forefront for me is, again, even the title of this show, Created in the Image of God. And I've often thought about how the male and the female, very important, two wings of one bird. You can't put two left wings on a bird and have it fly. Kind of doesn't work. But more importantly, how it's the unity, it's the vision of a bird in flight, right? The beautiful manifestation of that cooperation of two very different halves, two very different parts that are intended to work together.
Mm.
Adam was given the role. I often reflect on this. Adam was given the role and the purpose of dressing and keeping the garden. And then to get back to your point of impossibility, yeah, Adam, I know you really can't do this. You're going to need some help.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that
it's
help's going to
interesting.
have to approach everything differently than you and see everything differently than you. And,
Yeah.
you two are going to have to, work it out. And, and again, the curse of Eden is he will rule over you. That's not a statement of what God wanted to have happen.
Right. And with the other things in the curse, with weeds or whatever, we have no problem with thinking, well, that's not ideal. Let's figure out some ways to get around the weeds. It's
Right.
sad that we think, well, but this gender part is where it's I really look different is that I know that relates to what you're just saying. So I remember on a time when my husband and I had probably one of the worst arguments we'd ever had. And it happened to be on Easter Saturday. And it just felt like I was in the tomb, like I was really heartbroken and having a hard time imagining the way forward from this argument. And I sometimes, when I'm just overwhelmed, just kind of doodle. And I was drawing just these kind of wavy lines. I wasn't intending to create something that meant anything. I was just processing and praying. And so I ended up drawing I'll show you in a second here, but a green stream kind of flowing this way, just the green lines coming this way. And then, because that's my favorite color, and blue lines coming this way. That's my husband's favorite color. And somehow, as all the lines crossed, I found a dove, like a bird. And I'll show, how can I show this up to you? So you can see.
Yeah, move
It's
it
just
a little bit,
just doodles.
Move it a little bit to your left, I guess. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Okay. So you can see there's just doodles, lines coming from one side, the green, and lines coming from the other side, the blue. And
Beautiful.
I didn't actually draw that bird. That was just made up of the lines, and the place where they crossed became a dove, which represents peace. And it became my prayer then that in the place where our lives intersect, may that space of usness, whatever it is that we make as a couple, may that be a place of peace. May that be a place that reveals the Spirit to us and to the world. And that I think then became also a prayer that I think of for women and men in general, not just for one married couple. That I think ideally, where those differences intersect, we're supposed to reveal something beautiful to the world, and that intersection is not supposed to be conflict only. Not that we shouldn't ever have arguments, but even in the arguments, there's a way and that argument did become an opportunity for us to find more understanding, and ultimately, I hope that became a part of the answered prayer, that the peace came from even that conflict. So yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned a bird there, because that was exactly what came to mind for me on that day.
Wonderful. Well, we normally do 3 segments, but I'm not going to take the time. We're just going to go seamlessly into the last question because we've gone a little long on this segment. So what's next for you? Where are you growing next? And how can people engage with you and your work, whether it be through direct engagement or just something they would do in their own lives independently?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have some books already out there if they want to explore those. The Vulnerable Pastor, as you mentioned, which is exploring how on earth is this true that God is strong in our weakness? How do we actually live as if that's true? Then the Unfettered book, which I mentioned earlier, which is how on earth are we supposed to be like children to enter into the kingdom of heaven? And my more recent one was Confessions of an Amateur Saint, which is kind of behind the scenes of that vulnerable pastor person, looking at those daily confessions of the ways that I every day am tempted to be God in my own strength, and those confessions every day of my need for God again that allows me to keep doing this work. I've just finished up this book I mentioned earlier, What Women Know About Jesus, and that's coming out next year, 2027. in July with Nav Press. I'm also about to publish also in 2027, don't know the month yet, but with Erdman's a fable, which is a real shift from what I've written before. It's all been nonfiction up until now. The fable it came from a time when I was starting at my current church. The church was about to close when I first came, and I was sitting in this empty building and really could imagine that possibly we'd have to close the church. And right in that moment, I was pretty devastated about this possibility. Right in that moment, I heard a little gecko, little lizard that lives in our church. I live in the tropics, so we have geckos in our churches, and I've never seen him, but this little gecko just sung out with all his might in this empty church building, and it echoed around the whole place. And I just suddenly had this image that, like, even if this church closes for humans, there are creatures that live in here that are still going to be worshiping in here, and maybe they remember something that the humans have forgotten. And I just could not stop. That kind of captured my imagination, and I kept finding myself imagining about the things that live in an empty church. And so I've written a fable that I think kids who've read it have loved it, but it's mostly for adults to step away from our anxieties about the crumbling church that we find ourselves in, and to actually imagine what is still living in our church, what is still healthy and whole in the spiritual side of things, and what magic or mystery is still there. How is the church still enchanted? It's not our job to re-enchant the church. It's our job to rediscover the enchantment that's still there. And so I hope that by spending a couple of hours, it's about a 2-hour read, in this fable, they'll reimagine the church, just their ordinary congregation, in a new way, and the church universal too, in a way that allows them to see with new eyes and rediscover the enchantment that's already there. So that's a little project that felt like a very different thing. But beyond, and I have a website that they can find all those things on, and other things. Some of my art is on there as well. Thewayistheway.org is the website. I think mandysmith.org will get you there too, but I don't really usually advertise that. I don't prefer it being about me, but it might be more memorable. But the other thing that comes to mind, in addition to those things, well, I'm also often on Low in the Water podcast, which is put out by the Eugene Peterson Center. And that's a wonderful, I'm one of the regulars on there. It's a wonderful podcast for people in leadership of any kind, Christians who are wanting to do so faithfully and maybe just needing some friends in the journey. So you can check out that podcast as well. But one thing that really comes to mind for me when you're asking, what's happening, what's going on right now, with all of the things that God calls us to do for him, it can be, it can feel like, oh, there's so much work to do. It's never finished. It's always complicated. People are difficult, whether it's a ministry thing or leading a family or creating a piece of art or whatever it is that we feel God calling us to do. It's always, for me anyway, it's almost always bigger than I ever could do. And that can feel really unkind. It can feel like God's burdened us with something. And I refuse to believe that. So I've asked God for a better story of, well, what am I supposed to think? How am I supposed to interpret this situation where following you gets me in places that feel like it's too much for me? There's more that needs to be done than I can ever do. And I don't even fully understand what it is that you're asking of me. And what is your story of that, Lord? That's better than the world's story, which would say, God's just dumped a whole bunch of stuff on you. That's more than you can do. And as I was asking him recently, what's your story of this, Lord? He gave me a really strange kind of image, but I think it comes from Acts 17. I think that's Acts 17. In him we live and move and have our being. We are his offspring. And so I actually made a piece of art to help me process and remember this, and it's on my desk. But the image was of the things that I am being asked to make, and I hope this is an encouragement for your listeners. The things that we're being asked to make, it's like Mary, God asked her, can I plant something in you that's going to make a difference in the world? And it's going to cost you, but it's going to be carried in you. And as it is, you are stretched by that and you are shaped by that. And I'm asking you, will you steward that thing that I'm asking you to bring into the world? And at the very same time that Jesus was growing in Mary and it was costing her something, Mary was growing in God. You know, Mary was being held and nurtured. And if God has a womb, you know, we can float around in freedom in that womb, knowing that whatever we receive, in him we live and move and have our being. We are his offspring. So it's easy to focus so much on the thing that God's given us to carry and to do, and to forget the fact that in the very same way that it is being nourished in us and growing in us, we are being nourished in him and growing in him. And so that means that what's being nourished in us is also being nourished by him ultimately. So I ended up just making I call it like what's it called? What do I call it? An abstract icon. I love icons for the way that you're just able to enter into a story and find yourself in that story and be reminded of who God is. And so this for me is an abstract representation of, you know, this is God, basically, like the expanses of the universe. And I am in him. I'm this circle here. And he's asking me to hold something and steward and create something in me. But ultimately, both it and I am in him. And I hold this often, almost every day when I come to sit at my desk. I'm feeling overwhelmed by the things he's asking me to do that I can't see where they're going often. And I just hold that and I just say, Lord, I'm saying yes to you again, like Mary. And she didn't yet know what Jesus looked like. She didn't know yet what exactly motherhood would be and what it might cost her or what joy it might bring. And yet, like Mary, I'm saying yes to let this thing grow in me, and to all the way remember that I also am growing in you, and you are holding both me and the thing you've asked me to carry. So that feels more doable and more transformative and more hopeful than the things that the way I'm tempted to interpret the challenges of life.
Thank you so much. Could you hold that up one more time and just pull it back a
Yeah.
little farther? We didn't quite get the whole visual. And then just a little bit more to your, yes, perfect. Wonderful. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
And I can share images of both of those too if you have show notes that you want to include those in.
Well, if you could, that would be great. I will also be writing a Substack article and I can feature those in that as well.
Yeah, great.
So Mandy, thank you so much. We are out of time. I'm going to leave it there in terms of that image being your final words and your final
That's
share. But I'm going to definitely keep in touch and follow you and your work. It's beautiful in so many ways. Thank you for being here with us this morning.
Yeah, it's been so good to be with you. Thanks so much, Wade.
And for the rest of the audience, stay tuned, please, for the sneak peek of what's coming up next week. And remember to check out the Substack article about Mandy with those images, which she'll share. And check out her work. It's been a fascinating interview, and I've really appreciated it and learned a lot. See you all next week.
Next week on Created in the Image of God. Sunday, August 9th at 7 a.m. U.S. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Graham Tomlin, theologian, author, and editor-in-chief of Seen and Unseen. He reflects on the church's role in today's culture and how Christians can engage the world with wisdom, imagination, and hope. From theology and public witness to living out the gospel with clarity, compassion, and conviction. And then on Tuesday, August 11th at 8 p.m. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Derek Vreeland, pastor, author, and discipleship leader. He explores what it means to keep Jesus at the center and how his way transforms our communities, relationships, and everyday lives. From spiritual formation and peacemaking to following Jesus with greater kindness, faithfulness, and purpose. Join us live this week, Tuesday and Sunday, created in the